Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have the first of the, Ontario election coverage for the next election. Now, obviously, it hasn't been called yet, and there's no inkling it's going to be called anytime in the future. But as I am doing with several other series, like I did with Quebec in December, I am doing some provincial elections between elections now, just so my viewers, can get a good sense of where the politics in those provinces are. I can't say how frequently this will be updated. It'll depend on polls, depend on movements and such like that. But in the specific case of Ontario, we have had actually quite a lot of happenings right now, with Bonnie Crombie becoming the leader of the Liberals in December, and even over the last year, Merritt Stiles became the leader of the NDP. So lots of things have occurred that we will cover here. But before we get into that, I'll just once again like to shout out all of my channel members, and you greatly support the channel, and it's greatly appreciated. And if you want to back my channel or support me in any way, by all means consider joining below as a member. And if you can't afford that, I understand. Just do your regular YouTube things like share, subscribe, and comment below. But with no further ado, let us begin. So Doug Ford decisively won 2022. It's pretty much unquestioned. He had a 52-seat lead over the NDP in raw seats, and he also had a decisive, just about 26-point lead over the Liberals in popular vote. Liberals coming in at distant third in seats because their vote distribution is not very efficient. At least at about 24%, that's not very efficient. Since then, we've had a lot of happenings in Ontario. I won't go over every single scandal that has occurred, but the biggest recent one was the Greenbelt scandal, where Doug Ford was planning on changing the Greenbelt. He wanted to change the borders, do land swaps, etc., etc., in the hope of, quote-unquote, opening up good land for construction by swapping good construction land out of the Greenbelt for bad construction land out of the Greenbelt. Now, I am not super well versed in the actual intricacies of the Greenbelt around the Greater Toronto area, so I won't be opining here whether this was well-intentioned but poorly implemented, or was corrupt, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know the fine intricacies, but what I do know, and what is relevant here, because what the actual material relevance of whether this was a good idea or a bad idea is not, it's basically non-existent. But what I can tell you for certain, and what is materially relevant to politics, is this went over like a lead balloon. There was really strong opposition from the Greens, and most of the other opposition parties. The Greens are the main one here. And in particular, this caused temporarily, now, a lot of pushback in the rest of Ontario to Ford. There was a lot of damage in like central Ontario and a little bit in the southern Ontario regions. People unhappy with the Greenbelt being moved. And as I've talked to several Ontarians before, there is this tension between the rest of Ontario and Toronto, because Toronto dominates Ontario economically. A little bit population-wise too, but more so economically, so it gets more attention and focus than a lot of the rest of Ontario feels is warranted. Whether that's... So there is this tension here, and because of that pushback, and because of the fact that this pushback was materializing in a way that possibly could actually meaningfully threaten Ford politically, he's walked back from it. But upon walking back from it, this opposition, this pushback, fizzled away. Now, he's not in as good a position as he was in 22. He's down nearly 3 points. Or a little more than 3 points, that said. But he's still in a decisive position to win. And it really boils down to the NDP and the Liberals are too divided. Their vote shares are individually inefficient, and a lot of it is competing with each other. If you look at this, the Liberals and the NDP here, there's a lot of competition between the two of them in Northern Ontario, in Inner Toronto here. Eagleton Lawrence here. Is that Eagleton Lawrence? I think that is. And Etobicoke Lake Shore are two prime examples of this, where there's a strong enough NDP Liberal split that the PCs are winning with only low 30s vote share. And in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, it's neither party would want that. Now, the corollary is, and what needs to be stated here, is the Liberals and the NDP are not interchangeable. There are voters who will vote Liberal but would never vote NDP, or vice versa. So you can't naively combine those two vote shares and say 50% of Ontarians want a left-wing government, or 56%, because it's not strictly true. In fact, we don't actually know what percentage would want that, because we don't have a two-party system in Ontario. If we did, we would know, but we don't. Arguably, a PR system, you could probably get the same vibe from it, but that's not material here. So the opposition parties right now have a lot of competition between each other. That's why Ford can win so decisively. A lot of these rural ridings, there's really no contest. He's sitting 40-50%. And then a lot of these urban ridings, like these really close ones in Inner Toronto, those are Liberal NDP. The PC vote share in them is pretty small. The PC vote share for Humber River Black Creek is pretty small. It's only in the low 30s. And that's where we get the situation where the Ford government is able to win 83 seats, the same he won in 2022, despite losing slightly more than 3 percentage points of support. He's losing support primarily in regions he's strong with. And I'll just bring this over. So, well, that was unexpected. Pardon me here. You see here, where has he lost the most support from 2022? This is 2022. These numbers aren't exactly the final totals because I'm applying the same turnout numbers I'm applying here to these numbers just because of simplicity. So this is only a rough approximation of the actual numbers. It's not that far off, but it's slightly off. Anyways, you see in Inner Toronto, he hasn't actually lost any ground. In the north, he's lost a little bit. Hamilton, Niagara, not much. The main areas he's lost ground are south, he's lost 4 points. Central, he's lost 4.6. A little bit to the east, he's lost 2. And a little bit to the GTA, he's lost 5.3. However, you notice that GTA, he's still at 42%. Central, he's still at 44%. And in the south, he's at 37%. And his lead hasn't decreased by 4. It's only really decreased by 2. Because the NDP has also lost about 2 points in Central. So a lot of the areas he's lost ground in, south, GTA, Central, a lesser extent the east, he was winning the ridings, he was winning by a lot. So he can lose a few votes and it doesn't change the matter. It just doesn't change the math. Now, in the grand scheme of things, losing ground in the GTA will eventually cause problems for him. Because the main threat in current day for Ford is losing ground in Toronto, losing ground in the GTA. And that materializing into the Liberals or the NDP winning the suburbs, basically. However, I don't think that's the NDP at least, I don't think it's at all likely. The Liberals, I don't think it's super likely. It's not impossible. We'll get into that in a bit. The other thing to keep Note in particular Ford, just to bring this back up, pardon me, he has 32% in Toronto, and if we add other in the New Blue Party, this is New Blue for the record, it's a purple color or whatever, they're collectively about 36% in Toronto. We should expect that he's actually not going to lose much more ground, 36% in Toronto, because generally speaking, the overall right in a country right now, in an Anglo country, will get about 36% of an urban area. More or less. And this is an urban area, inner Toronto here, which is, I guess, Toronto proper. So we shouldn't expect him to lose much more ground there. It's really the suburbs, which is the GTA, and some marginal areas like smaller cities like Niagara or Kitchener or Ottawa, where this will come into play. Now, he could lose seats in Toronto proper, depending on how NDP Liberal votes shift, or possibly Greens as well. But in the grand scheme of things, his vote share is not likely going to decrease in Toronto, the city. So, where does this put us? Well, the NDP has fallen flat. They haven't been able to do a very good job as a conduit against Ford, as a marshalling factor of the anti-Ford vote. Because Ford is not a well-liked premier. He's possibly quite divisive premier. Some people really like him and some people really don't. And that doesn't actually really seem to spread across or filter across ideological lines. There's a lot of conservatives who really hate Ford, and there's a lot of liberals who really hate Ford. So it's not strictly partisan. But Stills, I'm going to say Stills until corrected otherwise, hasn't been a very good job of conduiting support, as marshalling the opposition. And you really see that in that the NDP is falling flat in the suburbs of Toronto. They're kind of falling flat in Toronto themselves. To go back here, they've lost ground in Toronto since 22. Sure, they gained a little tiny bit in the GTA, but only 2%, which is basically irrelevant. And in reality, they're losing their seat in Ajax, or Oshawa? That's Ajax. So they're losing a seat in the GTA even. It's just not working out for them. Then you look at other parts of the province, they're losing Thunder Bay. They're losing parts of Niagara right now. They've lost Kitchener Centre to the Greens. They're just not in a good position, and they've really kind of fumbled their hand here. And I would venture that part of the problem is the NDP leadership is out of sync messaging-wise and policy-wise with what Ontarians want right now. And you see this, I think, most aptly in NDP supporters' pushback against Bonnie Crombie. Their line against Crombie is that Crombie was too right-wing. That she was, quote-unquote, a conservative. Now, she's objectively not a conservative by, ideological means. If you want to look into that, you can check out my series or my video, What is Conservatism? She's objectively a liberal, ideologically speaking, but there is possibility, depending on what she actually does as leader and what she would do as premier if she won, that she could possibly be described as a right liberal. That might be true. I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows until she actually is given reins of power in Queen's Park. And who knows if she will get that. So we don't actually know what she is like right now, because what someone says and what someone does are not necessarily related, especially in politics. But the important difference there is her rhetoric, I would contend, and perhaps agree with, is more right liberal than it is social liberal. And that's, I think, why we're seeing Crombie actually gaining quite a bit of ground right now, whereas the NDP has kind of flatlined. The NDP, as a social democratic / social liberal, depending on the exact flavor of the leader, party, is doing a good job at monopolizing that particular segment of voters, but no one else. Most voters in Canada aren't that kind of person. In general, I would hazard a guess that about 40% of Canadians, no, about 60% of Canadians are some level of liberal, and about 20% are conservatives, and about 20% are probably social democrats, social liberals of some kind, or social democrats of some kind. Maybe we split up the left a bit and put some Greens in there, because Green is slightly different than Social Democrat, but it's roughly like that. Most Canadians are generic liberals. Now, at the moment, I think the Conservative faction is growing and the Liberals are shrinking, but it's a bit too early to say where that will rest. Conservative parties, in name, are more of a right liberal party with conservative factions. If you look at Pierre Poilievre or Doug Ford's barely done anything worth saying as conservative. He's more just of a liberal. But if you look at Pierre Poilievre, he's more of a right liberal, maybe a conservative liberal for being really generous. But he has conservative factions in his party and in his leadership team. But he himself isn't a conservative per se, ideologically. Politically, yes, but ideologically, no. And that's where Crombie might have a chance here at fighting Ford. It's not guaranteed, it's not certain. But there is an inkling of this because recent polls have put the Liberals in a okay position. I'm not saying it's necessarily a winning position, but it's not a bad position. The last two polls since Crombie was elected had the Liberals at 27 and 34% respectively, and they've had the PCs at 39 and 36. So in that case, the Abacus data poll had a 12-point conservative lead, and the Main Street had a 2-point conservative lead. NDP being either close third in Abacus or distant third in Main Street. Now, this could just be a new leader bump. That would not be unheard of. Usually when you get a new leader elected, a party will get a temporary bump because they had a whole lot of media coverage about their leadership race, and then it could fade off. We saw that in 2020-ish with Del Duca. He had a big media bump when he became the leader of the Ontario Liberals, and then that faded away entirely by 2022, and he was a distant third place in seats. We could see the same thing again. This time, though, I think it's different. Crombie has slightly better rhetoric than Duca did, and so far has positioned herself in possibly a slightly more optimal way electorally, at least rhetoric-wise. Whether she actually maintains this rhetoric is another question. But thus far, she's positioned herself as a social liberal type person, or like socially liberal, but fiscally moderate, maybe even fiscally conservative if you really believe her left-wing detractors. I'm skeptical about that. Now, normally, I think this is a really bad position to run. I don't think there's a lot of people who are actually adhere to these things, this combination. But why I think it might possibly, just possibly work for Crombie is the opposition to Ford is in two camps. There's people who don't like his social policy. Possibly the only thing he's even marginally right-wing on is social policy, but even then, marginal. And a lot of people who are against his social policy really want very liberal social policy. Much more liberal than a PC leader, even someone like Ford, would ever do. So there's the left-wing opposition to him that is like that, who are very socially liberal, and socially liberal. But the right-wing opposition is usually two camps. There's some people who are very socially conservative, which Crombie will never win, end of story. But then the other group is people who are very fiscally conservative. And if Crombie can credibly convince them that she will be at least more fiscally conservative than Ford is, without sacrificing her social liberal bona fides, she has a potential to try to make this a monstrosity coalition of these two unrelated factions. It's a risky gamble, and it could fail spectacularly. But there is an inkling of possibility it could work if social liberal types and fiscal conservative types, two unrelated groups in this case, are so annoyed by Ford in 2026 that they're willing to just gamble on Crombie for 4 years. In particular, where this might work out very well for Crombie is one of the only regions where you actually see a lot of fiscally liberal, socially liberal, fiscally conservative voters is the suburbs. That's basically the only demographic that fits that profile. Major city suburbs. And where is the main battleground in Ontario? The GTA. And lo and behold, that's likely where most of the voters who are the exact person that Crombie might be trying to appeal to are. So she can win a lot of ground in the GTA. She has the potential to win. She also has a home field advantage there. She is from Mississauga. She is the mayor of Mississauga right now. And in practice, now you have to really take a grain of salt with municipal elections because the turnouts are quite low. She seems quite popular in Mississauga. She won her last election in 2022 by 80,000 vote margin. Doesn't sound like a lot when you consider the fact that she only got 83,000 votes. Now, only 22% turnout in Mississauga for the municipal election, but she got 82% of the vote, or 80% of the vote of that municipal election. So, hard to say exactly what you want to call that, but it's pretty clear she's at least relatively popular in Mississauga. You don't win by such strong margins municipally for no reason. There is something there. Which is why possibly she's winning in Mississauga right now. Some seats there. So she has a bit of a home field advantage, and she seems, at least rhetorically, positioning herself strongly for the suburbs of Toronto and a little bit to the suburbs of Ottawa. Now, would that be enough for her to win? No, not really. We go here and we go look at seats. If she won the entirety of the GTA and the 2 more seats in Ottawa, that's only 24 more seats for her. That puts her at 37? No. 39? That puts the PCs at 53 or 59, sorry. You have a PC minority, maybe an NDP liberal coalition government. It's a bit speculative, but it's not quite enough for her to win a majority. So then the question comes, will she be able to do better in Toronto? She could pick up some ridings there. Maybe she pulls out things like Barry here. I can't remember which Barry this is. Let's see. Give me 1 second. Barry, Springwater, Oro, Medante. She might be able to pull this one out. Maybe she pulls out Bay of Quint. Maybe. Probably not. So there is some other marginal potential writings, but there's not many. The trick here, in the difficulty, math-wise, for the Liberals, for the NDP, is actually winning a majority's tricky. Knocking Ford down to a minority or possibly forming a coalition government is less difficult, but a majority is tricky. A one-party majority is tricky. In the case of the NDP, they would need to gain 40 seats. In the case of the Liberals, they need to gain 48 right now. It's hard to find out where they would gain 48 seats in the current polarization. They're very unlikely to win any rurals. There's the odd one, maybe Thunder Bay, Atikokan, maybe Glengarry, Prescott, Russell, again, maybe Bay of Quint, maybe Peterborough, Kawartha, but I think that one's marginal. There's not many of them. The PCs have a pretty solid floor. And they're so strong in the GTA, it requires them, any opposition party who wants to win, to really go at them in the GTA. That's really their only hope. But the voters in the rurals and the voters in the GTA are very different. And it's very difficult for a left-wing party to win both of them. It's a lot easier for a right-wing party to win both of them because rural voters tend to be more libertarian-ish, not like ideologically, but like, you know what I mean. More of the leave me alone conservatives. They tend to be more socially conservative. They tend to be more fiscally conservative. Tend to be more populist, that kind of thing. A right-wing party who can appeal to suburbs can usually win rurals. Not the inverse is not necessarily true, but Ford is a urbanite who can appeal to rurals. So he can win that one, that way. The main potential here, and the main risk for Ford, or the advantage for Crombie or possibly Stiles, would be if the New Blue Party can manifest into something serious. Because the New Blue Party could threaten the PCs in the rurals. Now, I don't think the New Blue Party could meaningfully take many rural seats, if any. But if they have a strong enough showing, it will force Ford to pivot to the right, which might give them an opening in Toronto itself or into the GTA. But then we get back to the math where it's hard for the NDP and the Liberals to form a one-party government. They'll likely have to form a coalition, and it might not be a very stable coalition because Crombie and Stiles seem very different. It's not like Singh and Trudeau, who are mostly similar. Stiles and Crombie seem very different, and both seem more prideful than Singh is. Which I guess is a virtue of Singh, I suppose, though it's bad for his party, in this case. Sometimes pride is good in politics, I suppose. And then we have a third wild card here, which is the Greens. Now, the Greens are a wild card because where the Greens are strong is it's hard to predict. There's a couple ridings where it's obvious. It's not well represented on this map, but they're actually in second place in Parry Sound, Muskoka. My model, to just be clear, it doesn't really like small parties like the Greens very well. It smooths out their vote share a lot. So I might be underestimating them in Parry Sound, Muskoka. I'm not sold either way on it. But it is what it is. But there's second place in Parry Sound, Muskoka. There's some inkling that there's some other ridings in this general vicinity, central Ontario, I suppose, where they are strongish or have a potential. Though it starts getting very difficult to predict where that is. How many people expected that the Greens are going to win Kitchener Centre in that by-election? Some people did. I know for a fact some people did. Not many. So the real question is, will the Greens keep building out? And who are they going to be taking seats from as they build out? I think since Schreiner seems to be a shrewd politician, and his party's gained a bit of ground, actually. It's up 0.1%, which is not bad, considering, and he's doubled his seats. We could see a situation where the Greens start winning some seats, more seats. Maybe they win Parry Sound, Muskoka. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's a lot closer than it is. 338 Canada thinks it's a lot closer than I think it is. So maybe they do better there. Maybe they start winning some other ridings. Maybe they win some in the north. Maybe they win some. Maybe they win Waterloo. There's other ones that they could possibly win. And that starts questioning who they're taking seats from. If they're taking it from the PCs, that doesn't really affect the math much. If they start taking it from the NDP or the Liberals, you can get into a situation where it's really difficult for anything but a three-party coalition to form, to unseat Ford. And unlike the NDP and the Liberals, which I already think is a difficult coalition to muster, I think Schreiner and the Greens will be even harder to pull into a coalition, especially if Crombie's leading it. The reason for that is I don't think Crombie, especially if she's running as a more fiscally right-wing position, is going to want to acquiesce to Schreiner's climate actions. In all reality, almost any demand I could imagine Schreiner saying will cost money. Now, Green supporters will tell you that that money is worth spending, and I'm not here to argue that. Either way. What I am here to say, though, is I don't think Crombie will want to spend that money. The NDP might be persuaded to spend that money, but that's where you start getting difficulties. I can see maybe NDP Liberal coalition. I could see maybe NDP Green. Green Liberal seems very difficult, and the triplex the traffic light, I'll call it, seems even harder. They don't seem positioned quite well. And in fact, if Crombie is positioned politically as her rhetoric seems to suggest, and as a lot of NDP advocates or Green advocates have alleged, Crombie and Ford are closer than Crombie and Stiles or Crombie and Schreiner are. In anything but a first-past-the-post system, a Liberal PC coalition is the most likely combination. If we see the PCs knocked down to a minority government. Though that does still require them to get knocked down there. And it's non-trivial to win that many seats. Again, the math isn't quite there. We can see maybe let's say 8-9 seats right now on the table for the Liberals. That's not a minority for the PCs. You throw in the NDP do a bit better and they pick up a couple seats. You could maybe see 15 seats, the PCs losing 15 seats, but that's still a majority. Slim, but who cares if your majority is by 2 or 5 seats? Doesn't matter. Not in Canada. The Premier's office is so powerful that as long as you hold it, you have the political capital to hold it. You can basically do whatever you want. The only question and only risk of having a slim majority is if your party discipline's weak or the opposition really hates you, it might be hard to pass laws. But in Canada, you can do so much things through executive action that's not a big deal. And law-wise, it's not like the US. You can't filibuster meaningfully in Canada. It's mostly a symbolic gesture to filibuster. You only hold up the agenda maybe a day, maybe 2 days. You can't just block the government's bills. In a minority, you can vote it down, sure. But you can't stop the vote. That's the trick. In the US, the Senate can just stop a vote. Period. End of story. The vote will never happen. The vote would pass, but it won't happen. Here you can't do that. You can filibuster all you want, but the vote will still happen. Still occur. And then the bill will still resolve, as long as they have the votes to pass it. And the government's not likely to table a bill they don't have the votes to pass. It's just a waste of time. So just having minority is already incredible amounts of power. Stephen Harper has been on record saying that in his 2008 minority, he had more power than Obama during his trifecta. Because in the US, 1 or 2 senators, even of your own party, abstaining can block a vote. Or breaking away can block a vote. End of story. In the House, too, has shenanigans too, but senators are obvious. It's easier to see how the Senate works. So where does that leave Ontario overall? Well, Ford's in a strong position. He's lost a bit of ground right now as a fallout from the... what's the word for it? The Greenbelt stuff. But this time next year, if he hasn't done anything bad, he's not necessarily likely to lose any more ground. He kind of has a silver shield, or force field around him, you could say, for the next about year, maybe 2 years, depending on when the federal election occurs, about housing. Because Trudeau is taking all of the hits about the housing crisis. You can argue whether it's merited or not. I think it actually is for the most part, but you could argue that, whether that's fair. But the reality is, Trudeau is taking all the hits. Ford can just sail through, even though there's a major housing crisis in Ontario too. Healthcare is a problem, but healthcare doesn't seem to be the animating force right now. It is people's number one issue in a lot of cases, but that doesn't seem to be dominating the conversation, so it doesn't really matter. The thing you need to understand about politics is it doesn't matter how many people like an issue if it's not in the discourse. As an example, most Canadians want to reduce immigration. It's something like 60% or something like that. It doesn't matter because no one's talking about it. At least, not many people who have any political influence are talking about it. So that doesn't materialize. It doesn't turn into anything. And right now, the issues that are at hand in Ontario are really not ones that hurt Ford, other than the Greenbelt scandal. And then once that's done and dusted and out of people's memories, if Ford doesn't screw up, he could regain his ground. He could be in a stronger position. Or maybe Crombie will be able to pull out something similar to what Waliev did and build a coalition that people didn't expect to see and put a real challenge to Ford. That could happen. Not impossible. Right now, maybe it's even happening. But it's too early to tell just yet. Perhaps by the time we have the next episode of the series, maybe in a few months, we will have a better idea. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next week with something different.